Okay, perfect. Jazakumullah khair. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be um part of this really cool series, alhamdulillah. Um and so yeah, the topics that I wanted to bring up, and then I'm honestly more of an engagement person, so I'll try to approach some broader areas that I think are critical, but I would love to mostly leave it up to you all to mention what questions have been on your mind regarding these topics and for me to address them. So yeah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So the first thing that I think might be relevant to this audience is, and it's a question that I do get a lot, is if, I'm someone who's interested in going into technology or business, like these fields where a lot of the major players have been shown to be complicit in genocide or apartheid or in the oppression of Muslims and of people overall. Like, what do I do, right? Especially because like we can say that unfortunately, like October 2023 has been sort of like a revealing phase where a lot of these industries and their issues that were not known before are now starting to become more known to the public. Um, so I'll say from my personal experience, even growing up in a Muslim majority country, when we would get these counseling sessions in high school on how to choose a field for university, a career path, the aspects that would get emphasized all the time are A, passion, like, choose something that you enjoy doing. B, career growth, like not like some, like dead field, like somewhere where you have the potential to grow throughout your professional life. And then three, money, like salary. And like now in retrospect, 8 years out of high school, it's outrageous how much we do not add this like fourth aspect when we're making these decisions, which is what is your impact on the ummah? Because as Muslims, a lot of people will say, well, like my job is just my job, and it's like the dunya side of things, and it's like 8 hours a day. And then when I clock out is when, I'm like being a Muslim. Like I volunteer at the masjid, I go to like MSA events. MSA is like our student groups. I don't know what you guys call them, but for a lot of people, there's this we tend to compartmentalize and act like our tech careers or our careers in any field are just for this like professional goal. And we do forget that, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us a command to do good, to be the stewards on earth, the khulafa, that he didn't specify subhanahu wa ta'ala, do that in your evenings. Like that is our role as Muslims in all of our lives. And if we come to think about it, our careers are almost half of our waking hours throughout our life. And so for that reason, I think if you're, at this crossroads where you're trying to make these decisions, it is really, really critical to consider, okay, will this career path, will this company, will this major in university help me fulfill my obligations towards the ummah, towards the oppressed, my duties to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in my job as well. And for some, and that can manifest in different ways. Like there's the, extreme where you're like in like as in like beautiful extreme where you're working at, say, like a da'wah organization, and every minute of your job is just dedicated to the ummah. But there's also the other extreme, which was my case, being somewhere that is complicit in the oppression of the ummah. So it's important to be as close as possible to that first extreme, and at the very worst, to be in the middle where you have a neutral effect, and you're not unknowingly or knowingly contributing to the genocide in Palestine or to oppression anywhere. And so what that concretely can look like is, for a lot of us, like we're taught that, to go to Microsoft, Google, Amazon, OpenAI, all these companies, like that's the goal, there's like a certain level of prestige, there's a certain level of income that comes with it, that we're just taught to worship. And for you to say no, like I refuse to work somewhere that is complicit, and I will take longer in recruiting, and I will take perhaps like a salary that is lesser than Google would offer me, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and for the sake of justice. I think is a mindset shift that we need, that our young generations, like we need to have. Like we have to challenge especially for us in the West, like you're taught like just save yourself, like focus on your growth, especially also if you're like a child of immigrants, like, your parents worked hard, now you have to aspire to these, prestigious roles. Versus keeping sight of what really matters for us, which is the afterlife, which is our impact. And so that is one point. If you take anything, I would want it to be this, like make sure that in every decision you make that is not directly tied to, being a volunteer, being like a what we call like a like free time, like a Muslim steward. How does your career also build towards your afterlife? Like that is ultimately what matters most to us. Um, and the second question I usually get when I bring up this topic is, well, what about, working in these complicit environments to have a seat at the table in order to make change? Like why is that not? Like why are you saying, just go somewhere that is doing good, or that is not, or that is neutral? And I will say like perhaps like a harsh reality I've observed working at Microsoft for 4 years and interacting with like senior managers who were Muslim, who've been there for 15 plus years. And like I had like some like coffee chats with some of them prior to making the decision that, I'm gonna disrupt and I might lose my job. And those conversations were often like, why are you staying given we know what we know about the complicity of this company? Um, and I will say these companies usually, a lot of people will enter with this like clear, transparent, I'm sorry, pure is the word, intention of I'm here to make a change. But the reality is that for people like myself who were like new hires, fresh in their careers, what ends up happening for a lot of people is you end up having to change yourself to fit into the culture. Like when you notice that people, which did happen at Microsoft, that people are being banned from promotions and bonuses because they posted about Gaza, and you're a careerist and you're aspiring to reach this managerial position or CEO position so you can make a change. You yourself end up, saying, you know what, just for this year, I'm not going to say anything because otherwise the same like retaliation will happen to me. Um, and you sort of, I feel like in a lot of times what ends up happening is having to make these compromises throughout our careers for the sake of that abstract long-term goal of I'm going to be high enough to make a change. And so I would say my personal opinion, and people can push back when we do like a Q&A, is, if someone has, 20 years of experience and would enter these complicit spaces already with that privilege, with that power, and then impose, our ethics, our values, I think that is a much more concretely impactful route than entering these spaces and letting them change you instead. So that, and again, that is based on my experience for 4 years, and I did have this belief initially of like I'm just going to change things from the inside, but oftentimes the inside is so rotten that for newer hires, or newer grads, it you end up being complicit without much impact in return. Um, so that's on the second point. The third and final point I wanted to make sure I address before like the Q&A is on, the relationship between AI and us as Muslims. Um, so I'll begin this with saying that a lot of the conversations around like AI right now are very um, very reminiscent of conversations that Muslims had about social media just, 10, 15 years ago. Um, and the same like skepticism by many that we're seeing around AI now is what happened with social media. And unfortunately, with the social media case study, we can see now that we've because of that initial lack of engagement and that fear and complete rejection of the technology, what ended up happening is now social media is central in all of our lives, but we had no say in how it shadow bans activists and how it propagates Islamophobic content and how it leads to the rotting of the minds of our youth. And so that like when I say sometimes like people like push back like when I say we have to engage with AI even though it has these like nefarious use cases like with Microsoft using AI for their surveillance and targeting of Palestinians. When I say that, it's because if we just say bad, 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 this is terrible, AI will become as prevalent in our lives as social media is right now, but without our input. So what does our input look like? For once, I know that a lot of people see them coming from technical background, like this will be about engineering, but I think we also need our youth who are interested in law, in the social sciences, in the humanities, to make sure that they're going into these fields of AI policy, of AI ethics, because right now these fields are so far behind. Like the technology is progressing at an insane pace, but most lawyers that I know have no idea how like ChatGPT even works behind the scenes. Like if it makes a mistake, whose fault is it? Is it the person that developed it? Is it the bot, which is not human? Is it yourself? And so A is even if you're like, oh, but I'm not, I don't like coding, I don't want to go into engineering, there is an opportunity for you to be one of the guides, one of the decision makers in this field through like these other fields that I have mentioned. And we need Muslim voices pushing back and testing these technologies for racist, Islamophobic, Zionist content and pushing back against these training patterns. And then the second thing is if you are more into like the technical side of things, again, I'm personally not a huge fan of the route of, okay, I'll start fresh at Microsoft AI and then I'll ultimately make a dent, given the insane level of retaliation and repression we've seen in these spaces. I think as Muslims, we have to stop depending on these clearly Zionist companies to be the leaders in this field. And it's like, okay, when OpenAI releases a new model and Google releases a new model, all we can do is, vent that they're giving us problematic content. Why is it that we don't? And I know that there exists there do actually exist even in Britain actually professors and technologists who are trying to build alternative AI models and AI applications. I think that is where we should concentrate the bulk of our energy. Like instead of similar with social media, like now most of our work is how do we fight the shadow ban? How do we um what's the word like game the algorithm. How about we don't rely on these technologies? And for a lot of people this seems like an overwhelming quest, like they're the biggest players, like why, how can we even compete? But one thing we have to realize is besides just Muslims, a lot of people around the world have woken up to the complicity of these companies and are seeking like you the whenever I talk about anything Microsoft related, the first two questions always include, okay, but how can we boycott these companies? Like, there's no alternative. Like, this is a real pain point for people of conscience around the world. Like, it wouldn't just be Muslims that are using your alternative, like ChatGPT, for example. And so there is a real need and a real thirst for us to build outside of these bought out, like sellout environments and yeah, have our own alternatives. And this needs to happen early on. This needs to happen now. We cannot once again play the catch-up game as we have with social media. And we're now no one can imagine a life where we're not using Instagram for content sharing, and even to share the news of our own people. So these are like the main, I guess, three buckets I just wanted to share, but I would love to hear more from you all in the Q&A section, and just make sure to address like the burning topics that have been on your minds.
Thank you so much for that. Though, like, touched on so many different things. Yeah, I think it's interesting that um,
I'm not sure if it's just for
like
me, but
there
Brother
is so
Adam is
much
cutting
that goes
off.
into AI and tech. People often think, oh,
Adam,
ah, uh,
you're breaking up a little bit.
okay. I might try with my camera off for a bit. I don't know if you hear me now.
Yep, that's better.
Okay. Yeah, I was just saying it's we often think that you have to study computer science to be able to kind of have an impact on a lot of these tools, but like there are so many different avenues for people with all kinds of backgrounds um, to be able to make an impact on these things. Um, I wanted to kick off with a question of my own, if that's okay, and everyone else can feel free to put questions in the chat. I've listened to a couple of interviews and podcasts and conversations that you've done where you say, kind of from the Hadith, where there are kind of three levels to Iman, where the first is kind of changing with your hands, second is to speak out, third is to hate in your heart. And you've said that you feel like your actions were the third, like you would consider it to be kind of hating in your heart, which I think is really interesting. It really makes me want to feel the need to do more. Question is kind of how can we inspire Muslims to challenge leadership in a similar way without fearing the consequences, of this world? How can we inspire them to take steps to make change?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I think for anyone who finds themselves in a similar position that I was in, which is, you're unknowingly actually in a complicit environment. Um, I usually sometimes struggle to answer this when it's like a mixed audience. But when it's like a majority, sorry, Muslim audience, there's a very there's like a hack, which is we know as Muslims that clearly from our texts that if you leave something for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or if you do something for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that comes with dunya consequences, with material consequences, that you will be rewarded with something that is much better. That is not like something that, we just say as a hypothetical, like things will work out. This is actually like a promise from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there is no reason for us to, have these fears that like, oh, if I like speak up and disrupt and get doxxed, it's over for me. I'm just going to be unemployed for the rest of my life, and everything will crumble. We have this certitude, we have this promise as Muslims that to quote like Imam Tom Fakini here, like he was saying, if you told like aliens from a different planet about Islam and the concept of tawakkul, and how as Muslims we are given these promises, and we know that Allah will not forsake us, and then you invited those aliens to come like live on earth, they would not recognize or realize that we are Muslims, because of how much fear is impacting our lives, because of how much, lack of tawakkul, unfortunately, we've let seep into our ummah and force us into silence, into complacency. And so I just say, and I know it's easier said than done, but just internalizing this concept of tawakkul, this concept of, I will do this with the intention that it is for justice, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I know at one point or another in this life and the next, that inshallah better avenues will open up for me, which I've alhamdulillah, like I've seen it happen like firsthand, which is within a week of getting fired from Microsoft. I just thought I would be recruiting for a few months, maybe a year, and within a week, alhamdulillah, like I got a job offer at Yaqeen Institute, which would, if you made me like try to pick like a dream place to be at, I wouldn't even dare put Yaqeen like on the list. Like it just seemed unattainable. So that is just like one example of how yes, you will face consequences here, like doxing, Zionist repression sometimes. If it's more behind the scenes, again, it can just be job loss, but things will get better. That's one thing. Sorry. The second thing that I want to clarify, um, for a lot of this type of work, like the organizing that we do at No Ajr for Apartheid, for example, which is our campaign against Microsoft's complicity in genocide, a lot of people that get the spotlight are people like me who were on media, who were visibly disrupting or visibly setting up the encampment that we had at HQ last month. Um, but what people don't realize is for these actions to happen, for at least my disruption and Vanya's disruption to happen, there were more than 20 people behind the scenes who are still anonymous, who still have their job and are organizing on like against Microsoft while at Microsoft, who don't face these as many of these consequences, and um, behind the scenes like work on like all the logistics, all the communication. So what I'm trying to say is, if for a reason or another, like for specific circumstances, you cannot like afford to publicly challenge this leadership, challenge these environments, there are like the majority of the ways that you can get involved in these fights are non-visible, are less, yeah, get less public attention.
Thank you so much. Another question is that I think, I'm trying with my video on again. Can you hear me? Okay. Another question is kind of big tech are really good at marketing themselves as this positive force in society. I think probably Microsoft does a better job of that than most other, like it's so easy to paint Meta as like just an objectively bad company. Um, like what was your experience of working at Microsoft before October 7th? And kind of when did you first start to feel uneasy about the work you were doing, but the work that Microsoft as a whole was doing?
Yes, another great question. Jazakallah khair. Sorry, quick logistical point. I think that because I was trying to look at the chat questions, it says it's disabled for me. Just in case that was the way people can submit questions, I'm not sure if they can, but you guys know, just wanted to flag. Um, so yeah, in terms of, I totally fell for the Microsoft propaganda. Actually, ironically enough, I had like an offer to also join Google instead, and I was like, I'm not gonna go work at this complicit company. Like, even though like it pays more, it's like a cooler role. I'm going for Microsoft because they're the only good one. So a lot of these companies, what they'll do is just whitewash their crimes with all these talks about how much good we're doing for the world. We're empowering people. We're leading change in XYZ. And a lot of people, including myself, fall for that. Like the reason I joined Microsoft was I want to do good. And I specifically applied to be on a team that does their like accessibility services. So it's like, oh my God, like if people have disabilities, they can now use Windows thanks to my work. Like I'm, having like a good impact on the world. And come to find out that these products that my organization Microsoft AI worked on for translation, for speech transcription, were also the same ones that would get packaged and customized to be sent to Israel to spy on Palestinians, to spy on Palestinians' phone calls, essentially transcribe them, analyze them, synthesize them, and then translate them to Hebrew for the occupation forces. And so it's insane how much PR goes into hiding these prominent uses of these technologies. And so I think it's important, like that's why it's important to speak up, to have some people speak up publicly as well as whistleblowers or as current employees, to just shatter this image, which I think, alhamdulillah, like we've started to do for Microsoft. It was the only tech company to make it to the BDS priority list. All the other ones are pressure targets, so that's a second tier. And it's a result of how many workers at Microsoft have shared what they're seeing in terms of collaboration with the IOF, in terms of contracts. So for me, the tipping point was um, after October 2023, like 6 months after, there was like this report of Microsoft Cloud being provided to the IOF. And at that point, I had this cop out of, well, I work on AI. It's not mentioned. I'm still doing the good work. Like, I'm doing the accessibility work. My hands are clean. Um, the reason why that was flawed is twofold. One is, even if I'm not working on Microsoft Cloud, my paycheck did still come from Microsoft, which is essentially blood money. And my work enabled the company as a whole to thrive as a complicit company. And the second reason is in February of 2025 is when another report came out about Microsoft AI specifically, and what I was mentioning about the surveillance technologies through AI. And that was my point where I realized, okay, Microsoft is so deeply embedded. Like Microsoft storage used in prison systems in Israel, AI surveillance, cloud bombing, and that was when I realized, okay, I cannot stay here at all. But I did not want to just, give them the gift of just leaving and not, as we say, like making them pay for their complicity. And so that's where that whole disruption came into place. It was to leave, to make my exit through a firing count in spreading awareness about their complicity.
And I think it's worth emphasizing just how senior and how deep the complicity is. Like, I think as far back as 2020, the CEO met with the head of like the Israeli equivalent of the NSA or GCHQ. Like, the CEO himself made time in his day to kind of meet with this potential client. I, he has many things on his plate. I don't know why that would be a priority. And I think even like when you were protesting, I mean, it's worth emphasizing Mustafa Suleiman, the CEO of Microsoft AI, has Syrian heritage. And I think his response of "I hear you" is just so interesting on so many levels, and like just makes you realize how deep it is. We've had a couple of questions kind of on that topic about like I know you've said from your experience, the core is sometimes so rotten, you just have to get out. But maybe I don't know if you have any similar experiences of other people in big tech or maybe working in the US civil service or I don't know, maybe the US military or organizations like this. Do you see any value in trying to make change from the inside, even if kind of the core is so rotten?
Yeah, concretely speaking, I would say where I've seen people be able to make change, again, is when they're at higher positions where, for example, they have a say in whether we should take this deal with Israel or not. They have a say in, should I put some engineers that I manage on this client, which is on this client's case, which is like the IOF. Um, I would say in my experience, like at least there's still I know a lot of organizers in Order for Apartheid who are at Microsoft, but they're mainly like using the privilege of being there, meaning their access to confidential information, their access to buildings and things to organize with our external group, which is No Order for Apartheid. So that's how we had like the encampment happen, for example. Um, and so and we also have, like, for example, at Microsoft, an internal group called Palestinians and Allies at Microsoft. And this group has been around for years. And were not able to meet with the Microsoft president despite like actually begging for years until we escalated and had our disruptions, our encampment, our sit-in in his office, the president's office. And so that's I think I think in my experience, like it's th these companies ultimately care more about profit and PR than they care about the satisfaction of a single new grad employee. So it is easier for them to be like, oh, you're going to be loud, you're going to be annoying about our profitable contracts with Israel. You are out, or you're suspended. They've suspended so many people, they've fired so many people, laid off so many people. And so, in my opinion, the only strategic way to make change from the inside is to not be in this complicit environment, acquire enough experience to be someone that would get hired as like a VP at Microsoft, for example, and then make a change versus try to. I honestly have not yet met people that managed to stay for more than 10 years and climb up the ladder without losing some of their like ethics or having to make compromises. And again, that's just my anecdotal experience. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think we've got a similar question, or kind of similar theme from Karima, who has asked in the chat sorry, just lost it. Do you think the core is rotten in kind of the British police force? I guess it is probably the same, maybe a bit more obvious in kind of the US. Um, yeah, I guess in terms of joining, is it something where it's worth trying to push through, break the glass ceiling, or kind of, yeah.
I think I'm from Canada, but I know there's a lot of parallels between the British police forces and how it is in Canada and the US. Um, the police forces train with the IOF. The technology that is tested in Gaza, in Palestine, for facial recognition, for targeting, for repression, is again literally tested in Palestine, shipped to these police departments. So I think, as much as I say like Microsoft is rotten, like I think, in my opinion, like the police forces are tenfold or like 100 times more rotten. And the reason why I say that is because these exist like at their core, at their essence, the police forces um will oppress us, exist to repress protests, to repress civil disobedience when you're opposing a genocide. Like it's not like a side effect, like a side consequence or like a fault in the system. This is how the system is designed. So like I know, again, same thing, that there are people who are like, oh, like I'm just gonna become like a police officer, especially in Canada. Like we'll have like brown and Muslim people be like, I'll join the police to help my community. And then wallahi al-azim, like those same people will be the ones brutalizing us at protests because that's how you're trained. That's who you have to be. And so that's more of a tangent, I guess, for my tech talk, but I it's just like it's sad to me, like that people go in and then you end up being the one that gets changed. Similarly to Microsoft and these complicit environments, you end up being the one that starts, beating an 80-year-old brown uncle because he was at a protest against kids being bombed.
Yeah, thank you for that. There's a question from Sarah in the chat, kind of asking, what would you advise someone who's passionate about regulating AI, maybe tech more broadly, in light of how it's being used in Gaza, but for someone who's from a humanities or law background, how could they go about kind of making an impact?
Yes, that's an excellent question. Um, I think it's a relatively new field. And so for that reason, like I know we don't have like specialized programs, like AI law, for example, the way there's like specialized degrees for other legal subfields. Um, I think the best thing you can do is also make sure that you're technically um, like like educated on a technical level, and that doesn't mean you know how to code or you can like build your own LLM. It just means understand how these technologies work. Like for a lot of like lawyers and people coming from humanities background, it's like I ask it something, it gives me something back. What's the mechanism? How do the biases that we see, like how do they come to to display themselves on a technical level? I think we really lack people in these fields. As I don't know if people saw this, but there's like a hearing for TikTok in the US Congress and or Senate, sorry, and these senators would ask questions like, "Oh, if my Wi-Fi is on, can TikTok read my messages?" Like very random, like uneducated questions. Like there was not a single question that showed that these people understood how social media work. And I think similarly to AI, we need, you know, younger people who understand both sides so that they can, you know, dig and challenge these companies versus staying stuck at the, you know, can Chat GPT turn my picture into a worm? Like just, I think we have to, you have to be well versed in the technology side of things a little bit as much. Um, and I guess to get started in the field, I think honestly, like doing independent study initially, seeing if this is even something you like feel passionate about, you know, doing your own like papers or research about the ethics of AI. And I know there's a lot of up and coming orgs that deal with this. I know at least in Canada, we have a bunch of like AI ethics like nonprofits or think tanks trying to even just volunteer initially with them to acquire that experience and then maybe like be a research assistant. Like just it's not like a field that's as handed to us as say like criminal law where like all these internships exist and they're structured and you do this, then you move to this full-time role, etc. It takes more effort to build your path in this field.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, I remember seeing that hearing in the Senate, and it was just so painful. Like these guys are supposed to be controlling it, and they know nothing about it. Yeah, I think even if we aren't from a technical background, we should definitely try to understand kind of how these things work. Um, we were scheduled to end at 8:15. I don't know. I do you have to dash off, or are you able to stay with us a little bit longer?
No, yeah, I see two more questions in the chat that I'm okay to address first. Yeah.
Okay, amazing. Okay, shall we take Razine's question first, where they're basically saying there's a huge bias towards big companies in AI, and I'd say probably tech more broadly. Um, Kind of how can we shift that towards maybe smaller companies? And if I can add my own spin, there are some alternatives. You spoke earlier about the need for us to kind of produce our own alternatives. How do you think we can effectively compete with these huge companies?
Yeah. Um, yeah, that's an excellent question. I think I'd touch on like 2 points. One is I think the onus of building these alternatives does not only fall on our talent, like our tech talent, our business talent, it also falls on our Muslim institutions to fund these efforts. Like I think, like we as Muslims, at least in Canada, I from my like few times like being in the UK, I know is the case as well. We have Muslim wealth. Like we have people that would be able to invest in such projects, for example. The issue that we have is we need the mindset shift where we like a lot of people will be like, oh, alhamdulillah, I've been blessed with a lot of wealth. I'm gonna donate 30,000 pounds to charity, which like that's a good use of your money. But 99% I feel like of wealth goes towards these more reactionary efforts of let me donate to solve this issue rather than address the root causes of these issues. Like we've been stuck, you know, like having to fund like relief efforts for decades now for our Muslim brothers and sisters. What the Zionists have done instead is just take their money to the political lobbies, to the tech companies, and essentially own these fields where now, like, they don't have like oppression issues to give their money to, if that makes sense. So I think we have to strike a balance. Like our institutions need to strike a balance in terms of like relief, which is also urgent and important and necessary, especially for Muslims, but also directed funds towards these efforts that frankly will can solve these issues, and we won't need to have these band-aids of relief, relief, relief. Um, so that's one point, just to clarify that I agree, like it's like the costs are often huge and are should not just fall on individuals to build these like alternatives to huge competitors. The second thing I would say, beside like this institutional mindset shift, is I think starting small and proving the value can also help with getting non-Muslim backing for this. Like, for example, building like a smaller like AI model that does XYZ task in a more ethical way than what's on the market, and taking that to, even like non-Muslim, like ethical venture capital funds, non-Muslim, even, yeah, like, pro-Palestinian investors, for example. Like if, like just diversifying the source of funding is important because again, as I mentioned, it's not only Muslims now who are like so desperate for these alternatives, but just starting small, showing value, and then, scaling it to be a competitor, to be something that you can sell out there.
Thank you. I think if we make this our final question, there's a question saying, how can we kind of nurture people to be confident to pursue a career in IT, AI, computer science, these kind of things? And then maybe a part B, so if part A is how can we push them towards these careers, part B could be how do we make sure that they kind of maintain a moral compass so they don't kind of lose their way or just assimilate in these organizations.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good question. Um, I think for the second half, like how do we make sure they don't lose their moral compass? I think it starts at an early age where I think a lot of like role models we give our kids are like, look, like Bill Gates is a billionaire, like impressive, versus look, this person is not a billionaire, but they're working on this cool like AI healthcare project. Do you want to be like them someday? I think from early on, we need to stop glorifying these like frankly like complicit war criminals as who our children should be. Like I know, at least for me, like growing up in Morocco, it's like everyone's like, I want to be like the CEO of the future Google. Like that's what we ingrain in our children. So showing them models of people that that are doing that are using technology for good, even if they're not uh, on magazine covers, or even if they don't have $3 billion in their assets. I think that's part one. Part two is again when we're having conversations with them and trying to guide them on which courses to take, which university to go to for which major, asking the question like, oh, like what good do you think you want to do with this field? Not just focusing on, okay, what are the prospects? Like, do you have mentors who can help you climb up the ladder faster? Having these conversations with them of there's a lot of good uses to these fields, and that's what you should be aspiring to do, versus just, the individualistic perspective that the West ingrains in us of how will this help you specifically be a successful person in the dunya. And for the first part of how do we make sure they feel confident, I think similar answer of just like role models, like showing them. And there are examples, like for example, Muslims in tech who are working on tech for good, who are like Tech for Palestine is an org, for example, that has a lot of Palestinians, of Muslims overall, of non-Muslims. The founder is not Muslim, building tech products solely for supporting Palestine. Like having these, I guess, like role models, if you know, these are people like you who care about Palestine, who care about their deen, and look at what they're doing. Like this could be the next two. I think role models are really important for our children to see. Good ones, not Bill Gates.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, this has been such a great conversation. I used to work at quite a large organization. There were Muslims. They like a lot of them were working on defense, security, all of these really uncomfortable projects. So like it's really amazing to be able to speak to someone who, joined a top tier company, kind of wasn't happy, really tried to fight it, and kind of kept their iman and vision. I think for yourself and your career, but also, for the Ummah as a whole. So, um, thank you so much for your time and for joining us. I know we've overrun a little bit, and I'm sure you're busy, but just wanted to really thank you for joining us and kind of sharing some of your wisdom. Um, so, Jazakallah khair.
وإياكم. Yeah, Jazakallah khair for organizing this, and to everyone for attending and for the great questions. May Allah grant you all tawfiq and success in beneficial endeavors to the Ummah, inshallah.